Wouldn't it be nice to have several thought leaders in your industry know and love your brand? Start a podcast. Invite your industry's thought leaders to be guests on your show and start reaping the benefits of having a network full of industry influencers. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I am your host for today's episode, Nikki Ivy with Sweetfish Media. Guys, today I've got with me John Golden, who is Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer for Pipeliner CRM. John, how you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, Nikki, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Good. Glad to hear it. So we're going to be talking about something that I and our listeners really, really love to get into. And you've got some kind of against the grain ideas about this. We're going to be talking about this idea that noise annoys, and some of your thoughts on the direction that things have been going and maybe the direction that they need to go. But before we get into all of that, John, I would love it if you would just give us all a little bit of background on yourself and what you and the folks at Pipeliner have been up to these days.
Yeah, so as you say, a Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer, Pipeliner CRM. We're obviously a CRM company. We have the world's most visual CRM designed to really engage salespeople. We were featured for the first time on the Gartner Magic Quadrant for Salesforce Automation this year. And we're growing throughout the world. We also produce an online magazine called Sales Pop, which is a sales, marketing, leadership, education magazine where we bring thought leaders together to share their ideas. So that's our kind of educational give back.
I love it. I love a give back. That's kind of what the spirit of this show is all about, right? Is, making educational resources accessible to folks at whatever part of their journey in sales and marketing careers they happen to be at. So I'm team that. But let's get into it. So the question you and I were talking about offline that really, really intrigued me is this question of, if everyone is creating, then who is consuming? And listen, I won't say I felt attacked, but I felt the need to self-examine, because I was like, I'm doing a lot of creating. But tell us what's meant by that question, what sparked it, and help us sort of understand where you're coming from there.
Yeah, and to be honest, as I said, I have an online Sales Pop, an online magazine, so I'm creating a lot of content myself. So I mean, this is aimed as much at me as anybody else. My point is that, so content marketing became this huge thing over the last, 5, 10, 15 years, whatever it is now. I'm losing track of time. And this idea of giving content and insights and everything to people, and it all sounds great on the surface, and it is in many ways, but then it turned every salesperson into a content either creator or aggregator, and everybody, and suddenly, if you want to, people were saying you have to be sharing content all the time. And let's face it, we're bombarded with so much content. How much content are we really consuming, in all honesty? And have we gotten to the point where we're all creating? It's like we're all in the movie now. Nobody's in the audience. We're all in the movie. And we're all there trying to push ourselves to the front. And I think that we've reached, in many ways, a tipping point, and maybe we've already gone over it, and it was reached a while ago, where it's become almost self-fulfilling, where it's just churning content, and nobody is really consuming that much. And it's very hard to find what are the valuable pieces of nuggets. And when people get overloaded with information, you do reach this cognitive overload where rather than become very good at filtering, you kind of just shut down and go, it's all too much. I'll just switch off. And that's where I fear we've gotten to. And even your LinkedIn feeds, I mean, how much of that, and maybe it's just me, but how much of that are people really reading and consuming, and how much of it is just a blur of stuff that's coming in? So I think there needs to be a step back and to people to start focus on why they're doing what they're doing, the value of what they're sharing, and looking, is there real value in it? And maybe then being selective and maybe getting back to that age-old quality over quantity thing, which I think has been lost.
Okay, so yeah, so it is controversial. So here's the thing, right? One of the sort of core, we did a piece, B2B Growth and Sweetest Media did a piece a while back on the importance of taking a stance on things. And one of the things that we take a stance on is we disagree. We feel like when it comes to content production, if your goal is to develop an employer brand, for instance, or to advance a thought leadership initiative, for instance, and differentiate yourself, then quantity is king, because you've got to have a lot of it to be able to put it out consistently to sort of achieve those goals. But I hear you on the point that if everyone is doing that, then it does become kind of diluted, and it gets to this point where it can be tough to figure out, both as the creator and the consumer, like which parts of it are noise and which parts of it are actual valuable things that, that I need to be listening to and paying attention to. And so I guess that's my question is, who do you think, who should be producing content? Because obviously there's got to be some creators, right? Because it can't go the other way where everyone is. So what types of organizations or what roles within an organization should be doing the creating, and which of us then should be focusing on the consumption, and who decides that?
Well, I think first of all, as I said, to take a step back and ask yourself, why are you creating content? Are you creating content because somebody told you somewhere that you should be creating content, or are you doing it because everybody else is doing it? So I think that's the first point. The second point then is to look at it. You say, okay, I need to create content to share valuable things as part of my sales process, as part of my marketing, as part of my branding. I think then you've got to take a look at, okay, let's look at the quality of that. Am I producing something that has real intrinsic value in it, that is well produced, has got good thought into it, or am I just putting something together quickly and throwing it out there and just going for the volume? So I think those are important questions. I think you need to understand your audience. I think that's a piece that's getting lost, because I think people are trying to produce, I wouldn't say generic, but they're trying to a scattergun approach and try and hit as many people
mass appeal
as possible.
for sure.
Yeah. And therefore, I think you got to understand who your audience is, understand what's of value to them, and then create something of value, and maybe spend a little more time. And maybe you won't produce as much as Company X over there, but I guarantee you Company X's stuff is dropping into spam filters 90% of the time now, because they're just putting out too much stuff. So I think a more thoughtful approach, and I just think really stepping back and asking yourself what you're doing and why you're doing it is a critical starting point. And then look at the quality of what you're producing. And here's the other key thing: maybe measure the outcome and results of what you're doing, because you might be shocked, and a lot of people out there might be shocked to realize that they're investing a lot of time and maybe money and energy in producing all of this stuff, and there's actually no ROI. Right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's the other important part, is like, just ask yourself, why are you doing it? And then asking yourself, okay, here's the reason I'm doing it. Is it actually delivering the result I'm looking for?
Right. No, for sure. So that's interesting. So once you've figured out, right, once you've asked yourself, should I be creating, right? Does the potential ROI and does the spirit behind why I'm creating, does it line up with this set of values that I have, or does it line up with this set of goals that I have? And once you've decided that it does, then you've got to really, as you said, be intentional about the quality of the content. What I try to do is make sure that I am not stopping my consumption as well, because it's helpful. And so I think for me, it's important to be a creator and a consumer, because it's helpful to know what's already been said in a certain way, so that I know, okay, if I am going to be, reinforcing this message because I think maybe it's something that bears repeating, that I'm being intentional about putting a unique voice on it, because there are folks that might want to hear that message from the other person that's saying it, and folks that might resonate more with coming from me. So I do think that there's, something to be said for paying attention to that sort of thing. But you're so right, though. There is this thin line. You're always at risk of just becoming noise. And I don't think anybody wants that. So as mad as anybody might be at hearing you say that there's folks doing too much creating and not enough consumption, I don't think anybody could argue that becoming noise is bad. Like you said at the top of this thing, I mentioned and attributed to you, noise. So,
and here's a way I always like to think of it, right, is you have access to this worldwide audience, right, in a way you didn't before, right? But I think you should think about it as a room full of people, right? If you walked into a room full of people and just start shouting headlines at them, right, randomly, I mean, people are going to think you're crazy, right? And they're going to shy away from you. But because we're online, people think that's okay. It's okay to just, as I said, spray and pray. It's okay just to randomly shout things out there or whatever, and not realizing that there's still humans on the other end of this. And right, for now anyway, there's still humans on the other end. Who knows where we're going? But there's humans there right now. And I think that, again, if you put yourself in the shoes of the people you're hoping is going to consume what you're producing, then I think, to your point, is you become more intentional. You become more thoughtful in what you're producing, and then you have a real purpose to it. I just honestly feel that has been lost by a lot of people, where it's just become the mechanics have taken over.
Right. It's this. So I learned this principle, and I think I may have spoken about this on this show before. I had a friend who suffered from profound hearing loss, and so he spoke ASL. He spoke sign language. I do not speak sign language. And so it was really interesting for us and learning how to communicate. And it taught me how poor at the time my listening skills were, because I was so focused on what I was putting out. And I had lost, which is the next point we're going to get to an extent, my ability to really listen. But when you communicate with ASL, if you've ever done this before, you know that you have to wait your turn. You have to wait your turn. Only really advanced people can sign to each other at the same time. But at the end of the day, there's still this element of you go and I go and you go and I go. And there isn't as much talking over people. There isn't as much noise. And so I realized in this interaction that he and I were having, that's something that, was way underdeveloped in me. And it's because we're over a lifetime, a lot of us, I'll speak for myself, we're rewarded. We're rewarded for the way we speak a lot of the time, right? If you have a way of speaking that people, whether it's written or verbal, that people find engaging, and you've been incentivized for that over a lifetime, then that becomes, it certainly became mine, your go-to, your comfort zone. And the opposite of your comfort zone a lot of the time is quiet. And so it's impossible to develop the kind of listening skills that you're talking about having, right? But listening, physically listening, and then listening as in having your finger on the pulse and paying attention to what you're consuming and what your audience is finding valuable is what's so important. So it's funny that perked my ears up when you said we need quiet because there's too much instant communication. I think you're absolutely right. Expand on that for us. And
I think that's key to it, is that listening, that we've lost the skill to really listen, and not just, listening is a physical exercise, right? But I'm talking about cognitively listening and really, and really understanding what's been said. There's another thing I come back to. There's an interesting thing that they use in family and couples therapy, right? Is where if you and I happen to find ourselves in couples therapy, the therapist would, first of all, say, Nikki, say what you want, what you need to say, right? And you would say it. And then I don't get to respond to it. What I have to do is I have to repeat back to you what you said, but not just repeat your words, but actually show that I truly heard and understood. So I actually processed it and understood it. And you're not allowed to move on until you, who delivered the original thing, Nikki, says, yes, that's what I meant. And I always come back to that because I think that's a really fascinating approach. And if you take how we operate in our daily lives, how often do we really listen and process what other people are saying? Because our natural instinct is to think about what I'm going to say. So while you're talking, I'm already thinking about what I'm going to say. And so I'm not really listening, to what you've had to say. And I think that's a skill that's been lost. And now, because we've become this strange culture of a very reactionary culture, we're so used to just, I'm going to answer that. I'm going to comment on that. I'm going to tweet that. I'm going to Instagram comment on that. And half the time I haven't even read the Instagram post properly and I'm already commenting, right? And I'm having to go back later and delete it because I realized I didn't even understand what was being said. And so I think that's where people, if you're in business and sales, that is a place where you can hugely differentiate yourself, is if you can really show your prospects or people you come into contact with that you have got fantastic listening skills and you're really trying to understand and listen to what they're saying, whether it's face-to-face or virtually. And the best way of doing that, and it's a huge compliment and trust builder to the other person, is when you ask them to validate what you heard that they said. So say, Nikki, let me just go back on what you mentioned earlier, and I just want to be 100% sure I understood it, right? And I give them, that's a huge trust building exercise. And the worst part about it is today, that's probably going to surprise people when you do that.
Hey everybody, Logan with Sweetfish here. If you've been listening to the show for a while, you know we're big proponents of putting out original, organic content on LinkedIn. But one thing that's always been a struggle for a team like ours is to easily track the reach of that LinkedIn content. That's why I was really excited when I heard about Shield the other day from a connection on, you guessed it, LinkedIn. Since our team started using Shield, I've loved how it's let us easily track and analyze the performance of our LinkedIn content without having to manually log it ourselves. It automatically creates reports and generates some dashboards that are incredibly useful to see things like what content's been performing the best and what days of the week are we getting the most engagement and our average views per post. I'd highly suggest you guys check out this tool if you're putting out content on LinkedIn. And if you're not, you should be. It's been a game changer for us. If you go to shieldapp.ai and check out the 10-day free trial, you can even use our promo code B2B Growth to get a 25% discount. Again, that's shieldapp.ai, and that promo code is B2B Growth. All one word. All right, let's get back to the show.
Yeah, and so when you talked about the how instant the communication is and how that plays into this whole idea of us, not listening, and now you're talking about commenting on what folks have said in a way that's thoughtful. I think that's the opportunity. I think a lot of the time when we think of ourselves as being creators on whatever platform, we'll just say LinkedIn because that's what most of us listening here are going to engage with. You just hit it on the head as far as where the opportunity is to demonstrate and practice listening skills. I think that if you focus on, let's say you decided that, you're going to keep creating content, right? On a every other day basis or however often you're creating content and posting on LinkedIn. But you decide you're going to spend just as much time in the comment sections of people who you would like to demonstrate that you're listening to, rather than this lazy, I liked this post, or fantastic, I think you're spot on, and then move on. Like you said, if you sum up what they've said in a way that's thoughtful and then ask a question, right? I want to make sure I understand what you said. So do you think then if X, then Y? Wow, that's really interesting. Do that might go even further. I don't know what the numbers are behind this, but that might produce even more engagement than just creating and throwing stuff out there might do. And so I think that's the opportunity here. if you like, no, don't take my LinkedIn away from me. Don't take my voice, my constantly being on it. Don't. So that's not what we're talking about. I think you're right. We're talking about doing it in a way that invites engagement. Right.
Yeah, and what you've just described there, Nikki, is classic, where you're demonstrating, number one, that you actually read the content that the other person posted, you thought about it, you commented on it, showing that you actually had read and understood it, and I think that's huge. And again, if you think about, it's all about trying to make connections and learn from each other, and that's a connection. Because now if I wrote a post and I see a comment from you that clearly demonstrates that you wrote it, or that you read it and you thought about it, all right, that's a huge trust building exercise. It's a huge compliment to the person who's created the content. It shows that there was value and worthwhile in it, and now you've got some dynamic going, as opposed to, as you're right, yes, and don't get me wrong, I appreciate when anybody puts a thumbs up and likes and all that kind of stuff. Sure. It's great. But it's certainly when you see somebody has taken trouble to interact with your content and actually understand it, that's so much more gratifying. And sometimes, and as I said, you don't even have to read it and agree with it. Sometimes, I mean, I've had some of the best ones in content I've produced in the past is when somebody disagrees with me, and we get an interesting conversation, and maybe I learn something out of it.
Yeah, for sure. When I think about, let's say someone I really look up to, who I'm wanting to engage on LinkedIn, I think about it as like if I had a celebrity encounter, and it's happened a couple of times. It's been super embarrassing where I met somebody that was famous, just totally stand out. I'm talking to you, Kenny Loggins. So I was just like, I go, you invented Blue-Eyed Soul. Justin Timberlake owes you his life. Oh my God, you take a picture with me? It was embarrassing. Anyway, so don't do that. But what I do because I lived in Austin and I would encounter celebrities at the airport a lot, or at like music festivals. When I think to myself, how will I make an impression on this person to where they'll offer to take a picture with me, and it won't be a tour, and I won't be bugging them, and they'll know that I'm not just wanting them to see me, and that I really do think and feel deeply about what they create. And right. What's worked has been to talk specifically about something that they created and ask them a question about it. They seem so much more flattered by that and so much more engaged by that, right? Than if I was just like, to simply say, oh, I love your work, right? That's so generic. That's the in-person celebrity equivalent of, this is a fantastic post, you're spot on, you know? But to say, oh my God, what you did in this, an XYZ film, God, what was it like to get into that character? Then you've got them. And so I think, there's examples of this, and I think we would instinctively do that in our regular lives. But you're right, there are so many people telling us, like, you got to create, got to put stuff out every single day, and that's what it's about. That we're losing sight of this stuff. So I am so glad that you've come on and had this conversation with us.
And be authentic, because what you're talking about there is authentic. That's an authentic conversation. So it's a celebrity or whatever, but that's an authentic conversation. If you're saying, this song you wrote, it meant this to me. Could you just tell me where did you write it? Where did you get the inspiration from? But something like that. That's good. Despite the fact that 5,000 people may have come up to me in the last 5 minutes and asked for a selfie, that's going to resonate because there's a genuineness and authenticity, a connection. And I think we can do that in our lives on a daily basis. It doesn't have to be with celebrities, but just, I think, to genuinely connect with people. And if you're authentic and you actually genuinely listen, we all have a friend, right? Here, I'll give you a good example. Right? We all had a friend growing up who, if you ever wanted to talk about something, they would say, oh yeah, I'm here to listen. And the minute you started talking, they would turn it around, and then suddenly you'd realize they're telling you something to do with themselves, and they've never listened to anything you've got to say. And I think we have to be careful that we're either not that person, or we haven't turned into that person, not just in our personal life, but in our professional life, in our virtual life online, that it isn't always about us, right?
Yeah. You've driven this point home. I love it. I love this conversation. By the way, Kenny Loggins, I do love you. Maybe halfway across the sky. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, so now, John, that I have successfully picked your brain and seen what I could get out of it, it is time for you to tell us about what you're putting in it. Talk about a learning resource that you've engaged with that is either informing your approach or that's just got you excited these days.
Well, yeah, and to be honest, I don't want to sound self-promotion here, but I do interview a lot of great people for Sales Pop, and we have expanded the range of people, because once upon a time we started, it was all sales leaders, but now it's people from a wide variety of perspectives. And every interview, I feel blessed, to be honest, because every interview I do, I learn something and I engage with somebody really interesting and who brings a whole new perspective. It could be from the guy who's trying to get to his 4th or 5th Winter Olympics. He does luge, represents Argentina, to people who have walked across America for wounded soldiers and all of that, but just fascinating people. And so I would encourage you to go to salespop.net and look at the interviews, or you can see them on our Apple podcast channel as well. But there's so many fascinating people out there that have fantastic messages, and just to listen to them and take away, if you take one nugget away that enriches you, I think that's been worthwhile. But like I said, I've just been blessed to talk to so many different and interesting people from around the globe, and I find myself going back and watching my own interviews, not to watch myself, as fascinating as that is to listen again to some of the things, because I'm like, that was really interesting. That's a really interesting person. And I find it very uplifting. And sometimes if I'm not in the greatest, maybe I'm tired, day hasn't been going good, I interview one of these people and I get completely inspired.
John, it's like you read my diary. That is exactly what my job is like. That's what my career has been since I joined Sweetfish. It's the same thing. I'm doing it now. It doesn't matter what else is going on. I come here and I engage with someone who not only, right, because we spent 30 seconds, 60 seconds talking about Pipeliner CRM, but I get to talk to people about what they're passionate about, what they're thinking about, what discussions they're engaging in. And it does, I think, it makes me feel empowered. It makes me a better listener if I'm doing this right. And I have the opportunity to just learn so much. So yes, you're right. That's one of my favorite answers, not that I'm biased. So just like me, John, I know that folks listening are going to quickly become fans of yours and want to keep up with you and follow along with what Pipeliner CRM is up to. How can folks connect with you, John?
Well, obviously, as we talked about, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find there. You can find me on salespop.net, where all those interviews are. You can find me at Pipeliner CRM. You can contact me at john.golden@pipelinersales.com, or connect with me on LinkedIn. So I'm pretty easy to find, to be honest.
He's out here, guys.
Yeah. Some people would argue that I'm out there, all right. Yeah.
Same. No, this has been great. We'll have to have you on again to respond to all the angry creators out there who are like, we don't agree, or just for any other reason, because this has been fun and I would take that meeting any day. So thank you so much, John.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, thanks for having me, Nikki.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.